Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Welcome to the party, pal. Good morning and welcome to it. It is the Tuesday edition of the Michael Dukes Show, broadcasting live across the state of Alaska on this your favorite radio station and or FM translator, and live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com, where you'll find links to everything, audio only podcast and the audio only stream and the podcast and social media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Hey, my friends, how are you? Are you guys ready to go? Are you ready for this Tuesday? Are you buckled up? Do you have your Band-Aids and everything else you might need because you're about to get bloody? Yeah, that's what it is. It's kind of crazy. Warm weather across the state. Not a single weather alert across the state today, which is just fine with me. Currently 25 degrees outside the studios here in beautiful I was going to say downtown Homer. I'm nowhere near downtown Homer, but I'm up on top of the hill and I'm looking down on everybody, which is a position that I enjoy. I've enjoyed looking down on everybody. Anyway, it's a beautiful day and it's Tuesday, which means we're about to get down into the dirty stuff. We're going to get into it. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, joins us with the weekly top 3. And I'm just going to shut up, and we're going to get started on this morning and see what Brad has to say. Good morning, Mr. Keithley, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great, Michael. I got the uniform memo today. The
uniform memo, yep. Did you get the? You didn't get the ATF memo, but that's fine. It's it's all good. But hey, you know what? It's a blue Tuesday. What can we say? All right. Well, Brad. The more we watch this, the more we wonder, are we ever going to learn? It just seems like we keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. And today is no different. Let's dive into the weekly top 3 and get started. Number 1 of the weekly top 3, the Senate Finance Committee gets an F in financial literacy. And I'm not sure what that F stands for, but I'm pretty sure I know what the F stands for, but I can't say it on the air. They get an F in financial literacy. Hit me with it, Brad. What's going on?
Michael, last week there was an article in the New York Times about Alaska. It didn't get widely reported in Alaska, which I found a little surprising. But the title of it was "A Critical Political Season Could Decide If Alaska is a Failed Petrostate." And the bulk of the article was really diving into the governor's race and what various candidates for governor are saying and what the odds are for governor. But the premise of the article was that Alaska has not gotten its fiscal act together. And in this next run, this next governor's run this year, the question is whether it will ever get its fiscal act together. And as if on cue, to prove that we can't get our act together, there were a couple of things that happened during the week that just demonstrated that we just will never learn. And while financial literacy courses are not required in Alaska high schools, maybe they should be to become a legislator. The first thing that struck my eye as I was pondering the New York Times article was a memo circulated by Senator Hoffman, who's the co-chair of Senate Finance in charge of the operating budget this year. And Senator Hoffman sent out instructions to the Finance Subcommittee, and those interested can find the memo on the Alaska Landmine Twitter page of all places, but sent out a memo instructing the subcommittee co-chairs to use $73 a barrel instead of the $75 forecast by the Department of Revenue for FY27, and reserving at least $50 million for a supplemental budget. So the Department of Revenue came out with the spring forecast that forecast $75 a barrel as the likely price of oil, the likely average price of oil over FY27. And that in turn generates a certain amount of revenues for the state. And we just talked about this last week or the week before. If it were me, and if it were anybody who had taken the financial literacy course, they would say, okay, we're not going to use that. That's nice. But we're going to use the average price over the last 5 years as we do for the POMV, or as we do for the calculation of the PFD, or at least the statute would tell us that's what we do for the calculation of the PFD. We're going to use the average over the last 5 years, or the average over the last 10 years, which is a little bit smoother way of approaching oil prices. And any overage that we actually experience, because this is a projected price, right? Any overage that we actually experience, we'll put into some sort of stabilization account. That's what anybody who took a high school financial literacy course would think about this. But that's not what the Senate is thinking about. Evidently, the Senate was thinking, $75. Oh, we'll spend it all. And Lyman's going to claim to be the great fiscal conservative by saying we're only going to use $73 a barrel and reserve, $50 million plus or minus for the supplemental budget. If that wasn't enough, then during the course of the week, the House Finance Committee chairs published their new draft budget that's being considered by House Finance. And you can find that, for those interested, you can find that at the legislative finance page on the web, legfin.com or .state.ak. There you go. But legislative finance on the web. And that projects, get this is the operating budget before the PFD, before the capital budget. Right. The operating budget, the new House Finance proposed budget is $5.1 billion. No, a total of $5.6 billion for the operating budget, the agency budget, and statewide items alone. This is before the PFD, before the capital budget. $5.6 billion alone. That is, just to give you some sense, that is roughly $450 million more, $500 million more than is in the FY26 management plan. And it's nearly $400 billion or $400 million, $396 million more than what the governor proposed in his budget, which was already up from what was in the FY26 management plan. So I think the answer to the New York Times question is, is Alaska a failed petrostate? I think the answer is yes. Yeah. I think the answer, even before we get to the governor's race, I think the answer that both Senate Finance, in saying let's predicate the budget on $73, we saved $2, $73 a barrel, and House Finance now raising last year's budget by $500 million. What is that? More than 11%. Raising last year's budget by $500 million is the answer. I mean, we've already gotten the answer to the New York Times question.
And again, you mentioned that doesn't even include the capital budget, which has been underfunded per constitutional mandate for several years, or the PFD. Again, anybody in their right mind would say, we've got a windfall. Do we cash it away? Or do we spend right up to the line when we're already struggling with what we've been making for the last few years? This is the thing that could bail us out for a short term. But I mean, again, the number would have been what? 67, 68 would have been the number.
67 on the 10-year average.
Yeah, on the 10-year average. So, I mean, $67. So we're $8 over that. could have banked all that money, could have put a little bit away for a rainy day. These guys just cannot help themselves. They just want to spend every available dollar that's there.
Could have paid back some of the CBR draw that we've made over the last last decade. Yeah, it's and I guess to put this in context, the Senate, the reason Lyman's talking about $73 is the Senate, which has control of the capital budget, is thinking about a big capital budget. If you read the bottom part of his memo, the bulk of the $510 million windfall, the bulk of the $510 million projected FY27 windfall should be reserved for one-time critical school construction, major maintenance, and other deferred maintenance needs, as well as building reserves. That's sort of the tail end of the sentence. But the bulk of the $510 million windfall. So what we got is the House Finance Committee spending it all by upping the operating budget, and the Senate saying, "Oh, we want to spend it all," by upping the capital budget. And what happens when you combine the two of those? They don't reconcile them and say, "Oh, we're going to keep it at a flat number and each of you have to take a haircut." They just both add it on in. So we're heading toward, again, the failure of high school financial literacy courses. High school financial literacy courses tell you that when your income has a windfall, you put it away, because there will be years when your income doesn't have a windfall, when your income has a shortfall. Right. And even if you don't, even if you have a steady income, you'll still be able to, you'll have that as a nest egg toward retirement. That's what high school financial literacy courses tell you. We can't, neither house of our legislature is applying that lesson to the FY27 budget.
Brad, you and I have talked a lot about how there's still money on the table for the oil companies. And we should have gotten a better deal for our oil, SB 21, et cetera, et cetera. And I look back at that and thought, if we did, and I'm wishing we had, but and if we did, and if we got this extra $400 million or $500 million that's still on the table, this just proves one thing: it would have all been spent anyway. There wouldn't have been a full PFD, because they would have found another excuse to spend it as well. We have got to enshrine the PFD, and we have got to get some kind of spending cap on this legislature, because otherwise they are just out of control. It wouldn't have mattered if we had another $1 billion in revenue from the oil companies. They would have spent every single farthing of it.
Yeah, it's certainly disappointing. I mean, all of the discussion about revenue issues, which I talk about a lot on the show, all of the discussion about revenue issues is predicated on having a financially literate legislature or a financially literate governor who is willing to, send the budget back, which we talked about back in when was he elected? 2018, which we talked about in 2019. Just send the budget back because it's too high, and make the legislature deal with it again. I mean, all of the revenue discussions are predicated on having a financially literate legislature. If we don't have a financially literate legislature, then the New York Times is right to question whether we are a failed petrostate. We're just going to spend ourselves into oblivion as we go. And it's tough. The state is entitled to those additional revenues. The state should have those additional revenues. They should be, and those additional revenues, should be on the state side of the line as opposed to the private companies side of the line. But if you're going to just blow it, if you're not going to use it toward the CBR, if you're not going to use it to comply with the statutory mandate on the PFD, if you're just going to blow it on additional, spending that, all the legislatures would say, "Oh, it's necessary spending," or at least Lyman would say it's necessary spending. If they're just going to blow it on that additional spending, then you've got you're legitimate. It's a legitimate question how hard we should be pressing on the revenue items, because you just don't have faith that the legislature is going to be financially literate in how they deal with those additional revenues. It shouldn't be that way. I mean, the state's entitled to the maximum maximum benefit that it can receive out of its resources. And that's a fairly careful calculation that you can go through. And the state should be entitled, and the state should have that. But if they're just going to blow it in a way that doesn't, accrue that benefit to individual Alaska families, or doesn't accrue that benefit to future generations, if they're just going to continually spend the windfall when it comes,
no, it's frustrating to look to see that if we had that money, the growth of government would have been even more explosive, and that is the danger. Ben Carpenter and I talked about that a lot, where we're just allowing the government to grow unchecked at this point. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. The weekly top 3 continues. Number 2 is dead ahead. We'll be back with more right after this.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Ben says, blow it on operating budget, not on capital budget, that arguably benefits the private economy, right? I mean, if you're going to argue about it and get down to semantics and brass tacks, he is right. I mean, at least the capital budget does, in effect, benefit part of the private economy. Now, the part of the private economy that's the corporate cronyism. But again, at least, we haven't even got into that. Now, wait, before you answer that one, Harold says, let's talk spending and draining our SBR and CBR while SB 21 drained the state over the last 12 years. It continues to drain our oil at giveaway rates. Here's the thing. This is my comment on this, Brad, and I want your thought on this. You and I just agreed. There's money on the table. It should be picked up. It should be taken. But the spending and the draining of the SBR and the CBR is strictly a legislative problem. They're the ones that decided that instead of balancing a budget, they'd rather draw out of our savings accounts. And again, overspend. They have overspent. And if they'd had another $500 million a year, we've already seen they would have overspent it. So we would still be drained. And I agree, we need to get maximum benefit for our oil and that there's money on the table. But this is not simply a lack of revenue problem. This is a spending problem.
Well, it's a combination of both. I mean, we've built up our spending, and we build up the state's services to a point where we, except in years where we have these oil windfalls, we really can't finance it. And so we've got a level of government and a level of government spending that we can't pay for, except in windfall years, that we can't pay for. And as Dunleavy, as the experience of 2019 shows, we're not going backwards on those spending levels. Dunleavy couldn't even get 16 in the legislature, 16 out of 60 in the legislature to back him up on the level of vetoes that would have brought him back to his initially proposed level. So we're not going backwards on spending. So when you set aside the windfall years, there is a revenue issue. And the revenue issue has manifested itself in terms of draining the reserves and draining the PFD. The problem is, you would think out of those years we would learn the lesson that when you have a windfall year, as it appears that we're coming up on now, when you have a windfall year, you refill the coffers so that you have less of a revenue problem. Somewhat less of a revenue problem in the normal years when you get back to normal oil prices. You would think that's the lesson we would take away, but neither neither the Senate Finance Committee nor the House Finance Committee are taking that lesson. They're taking the lesson that, there's more money on the table, so let's spend it, because people come down to Juneau, they send lobbyists down to Juneau, or they come down in droves themselves to Juneau, and they say, we need this, we need that, we need the other thing. It's for the kids. It's for, this, that, and the other thing. And they spend it. And so, there's a real tension here when you talk about we should get the maximum benefit. We should get additional oil revenues, and that should help lessen the revenue problem that we have. But when the legislature does things like this, what they're doing this year, or appear to be on track to do this year, in terms of significantly higher spending levels, just because we have windfall revenues.
Yeah.
When the legislature is on track to do things this year, it really just makes you shake your head and wonder what the hell.
Well, and Kevin says, buckle up, Brad. It's only going to get worse. Amendments for the next 3 days or so. Typically, the vast number of amendments come from the minority on the finance committee, but take heart, this majority never disappoints. And Rob says, in my humble opinion, failed petrostate is redundant. This is the reason that Milton Friedman said we should hand out the oil money to individuals instead of using it for government spending. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong on this. All right. I'm sorry. I forgot to put the timer up for you, but we got 15 seconds. We're ready to jump back into it. But I mean, I'm getting a little depressed, Brad. I mean, I really, really am. Like, I'm thinking, and maybe we'll pick this up in the next break, but I'm just thinking the only way we're ever it's going to have to come crashing down. It's just going to have to. Damn. All right. We got to go. Back with more. Let's do it. Here we go.
You don't look that excited that you're listening to the Michael Dukes Show, but it's probably just because you got a bunch of Botox. Are you smiling? Blink twice if you need help. This is the Michael Dukes Show.
All right. Don't judge me for the Botox, man. I need it. I'm trying to stop them frown lines. All right. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3. Number 2, the weekly top 3. SB 274. It's a bill that many of us probably have not been paying attention to or maybe not have heard of. Brad says it's important, though, and it ignores the fundamental problem. Brad, walk us through what you got here.
So SB 274, we've actually talked about it on previous segments, and we'll probably be talking about it for more segments as this legislature goes along. But SB 274 is a proposal originated in Senate Finance to reduce the POMV draw, the amount of the POMV draw, from 5% over a roughly 6-year period down to 4.5%, waiting a year and then starting a reduction of 1% a year. So 4.9 and 4.87, and then down to 4.6, and then down to 4.5 in the last year of the reduction. And there's two motivations going on here. One is that the motivation you see a lot in the op-ed columns is that the Permanent Fund Corporation is not earning enough to fund 5%, a 5% POMV draw, that it's under earning. And as a consequence of that, continuing the POMV draw at 5% is ultimately going to force you into a situation where you either have nothing left in the earnings reserve, or those who propose the constitutional amendment that would merge the two permanent fund accounts, where they start drawing from the permanent fund corpus. That's one motivation. The Permanent Fund Corporation is not achieving the objective. The second motivation sort of came up in a Senate Finance Committee hearing this week, where Senate Finance had Callan, the Permanent Fund Corporation's paid advisor, come in and talk about the 4.5% rate and how Callan viewed the 4.5% rate. And basically, Callan's perspective was starting again from the premise that the Permanent Fund Corporation is not earning 5%. Callan's analysis was, look, lowering it down to 4.5% from 5% will keep more money. Let's say the Permanent Fund Corporation earns 4.8 or 4.9 or whatever, earns something between 4.5 and 5. That lowering the POMV draw down to 4.5 will keep more money in the permanent fund itself, and invested, that will help the permanent fund to grow. Ultimately, I think 20 years down the road is what Callan's estimate was, and those were fairly optimistic assumptions, but 20 years down the road, ultimately, because you build up the permanent fund to higher levels by reducing the current draw, ultimately generating additional money in the draw, even at 4.5%, than you would if you continued it to make it at 5%. If you continue to make the draw at 5%, I think both of those rationales are wrong. I think the Senate Finance Committee is focusing on the wrong thing. The problem with the permanent fund is not that it's earning less than the 5%. And so, we ought to question the 5%. The problem with the permanent fund corporation is it's not maximizing its earnings. It's not earning what it should be. It's not performing at the levels in terms of the returns it's generating,
right?
That it could be. It's not.
And that's where Callan says that in their, I pulled the chart up. Callan said that in their own chart. They show it in the 1, 3, 5, and 10-year averages. They show they're not even earning 4.5%.
Yeah. And that's the point. This is from a previous Callan presentation, but it's right. And that's the point Callan makes in saying, you lower it down to 4.5% and you generate more money. I mean, you get away from the problem that they're not generating 5% now. But the real test here, I think, is when you look at the permanent fund corporation's returns compared to the S&P 500. And I'm not automatically saying you go to the S&P 500. I'm just using it as a baseline to compare to. The Buffett rule of 90-10, 90% S&P 500, 10% a debt ETF. When you look at the permanent fund against those other baselines, even the permanent fund corporation's own passive investment baseline. And the passive investment baseline is, let's put this on automatic pilot. Let's invest in ETFs, generally, recognized, reputable ETFs, and sort of put this thing on passive investment where the benefit of that is we're not spending $1 billion a year in management fees to have, to spend on advisors that are micromanaging the investment of the fund, not to produce 5% at the end. Even when you compare the permanent fund corporation's return against its own passive investment benchmark, it's still not generating the returns that its own. I mean, they get to decide what it is. It's not the S&P 500. It's not the Buffett rule. They decide what the passive investment benchmark is, and they're not even achieving that through their actively managed account. So the problem is not, I don't think, the problem isn't that the permanent fund corporation is earning less than 5%, and so we ought to drop the POMV draw down to 4.5%, or the problem isn't that we can build up the permanent fund corpus value over the next 20 years in a way that ultimately can produce more money for Alaskans and where we're going with the 5% draw. The problem is the permanent fund corporation is underperforming. And the Senate SB, the bill that the Senate's currently considering, doesn't address that at all. It just sort of gives up. It says, the permanent fund corporation is not achieving 5%, so we ought to reduce the draw to recognize that the permanent fund corporation is not achieving 5%, instead of saying, let's have some hearings on why the permanent fund corporation isn't matching even its own passive investment benchmark. And let's figure out what the heck's going on with the permanent fund corporation. And I think the answer to that would be, oh my gosh, the permanent fund board doesn't know what they're doing, because none of them are investment specialists. We've got a bunch of really great people, nice people, terrific Alaskans on there, but they don't know what they're doing on investments. And I think if you had the hearings that said, why isn't the permanent fund corporation achieving these alternate benchmarks, looking at the S&P 500, looking at the Buffett rule, looking at its own passive investment, why isn't the permanent fund corporation achieving those? I think those would be a lot more productive hearings than trying to sort of give up and say, well, we admit defeat. Right. The permanent fund corporation is not going to get to 5%. So let's take it down to something that the permanent fund corporation is going to achieve over time. It's just, it's throwing in the towel as opposed to concentrating on things that would make Alaska better. I mean, Harold goes off on not getting the maximum benefit out of our oil resource. Okay, we're not getting the maximum benefit out of our permanent fund because of the investment policies the Permanent Fund Corporation is following. We ought to be focusing on that. We ought to be focusing on increasing the take from oil. We ought to be focusing on increasing the take from the permanent fund. And this bill, as I said, sort of throws in the towel. It doesn't focus on that issue. It just says, "Yep, we're not going to get there, so let's take down let's reduce the POMV draw down to something that maybe, hopefully, the Permanent Fund Corporation can achieve."
Right. Well, but there is also an alternative to that too, because SB 274 is kind of the precursor and some of the groundwork for combining the ERA and the corpus, right?
Well, it may be that. I mean, it's not. It doesn't have that in there right now. I suppose they could consolidate it with the constitutional amendment, pass them in parallel or something. But yeah, that would be even worse. I mean, that would be going in even the worse. I mean, that throws in the towel also. It says, well, Permanent Fund Corporation can't generate enough to keep the POMV draw going. So let's just throw in the towel and consolidate the two accounts so that when it doesn't, we can start drawing from the
corpus. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and so Brad, I mean, I do note that there have been a couple politicians that have at least acknowledged what you're saying. I mean, we are making a difference in that people are finally, I mean, I think we're the only people that are talking about the permanent fund and the way that it's investing and the S&P 500 benchmark and the $1 billion. I heard a politician the other day say something about $1 billion, nearly $1 billion in fees for the permanent. Somebody's finally, they're listening to us and they're talking about it, but not nearly fast enough. I mean, this should be, in my opinion, a cornerstone issue for gubernatorial candidates. They should be looking at that and say, we could save nearly $1 billion a year right there just by not paying these management fees. And in the long run, we'd be money ahead. I mean, you pointed out the chart. Sure, there's ups and downs, and sometimes the S&P benchmark is lower than what the permanent fund has made. But overall, if we tied it to the S&P in the last 10 or 15 years, we'd be at 120 billion instead of 80. Well, I guess we're down to 76 billion or whatever it is now because we took a hit. But we'd be up to 120 billion compared to the 80 billion. And so somebody at least is finally talking about it, but not many. This should be a cornerstone issue.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. I mean, maybe it's because we've had this discussion about oil taxes for a long time. People think they're comfortable talking about it, and so the claim that we're not getting enough of our oil is a fairly standard one out there, and we've had hearings on it and all that sort of stuff. But it's the same thing. We're not getting enough out of our permanent fund resource. We're not getting enough out of our financial resources. I guess the theme of today's program is nobody took financial literacy 101 or took financial literacy in high school, because we've got this huge financial resource. Good for us. We built it up over time. Good for us. It's been invested in a way that at least it didn't lose money over time. But you've got this huge financial resource, and just like you look at your oil resource and maximizing the benefit out of the oil resource, you ought to be looking at maximizing the benefit out of the financial resource. And I don't get a sense that the legislature is doing that. Anybody in the legislature is doing that. And SB 274, to me, is a confirmation they're not doing that, because it's saying, look, we're not going to get to 5%, so we ought to just sort of take it back. We ought to recognize that and just sort of take it back to some level that we can achieve. Problem is, when you have that chart up there, the chart shows in a number of years, a number of 5-year periods, they didn't even get to 4.5%. They didn't even get to 4% in a number of those periods. They didn't get to 3% in a number of those periods. So if you're going to start giving up and saying we're not going to achieve these numbers, and so we ought to reduce it to something that we may be able to achieve, it's not clear that 4.5%. Given the current investment strategy that our permanent fund is following, it's not clear that 4.5% is going to be the right number.
Right. Well, as you pointed out with that previous Callan chart, and Ben Carpenter in the chat room says the same thing. Callan says 50% of the time the corporation's not going to make the 5%. It's slightly better with 4.5, but not much. So, I mean, they're not even going to make that 4.5% if they keep doing things the way that they're going to do them. Final thoughts on number 2, Brad?
Number 2 is the Senate Finance Committee and the legislature as a whole is going in the wrong direction on looking at the permanent fund. Rather than giving up and saying, well, we ought to reduce the POMB draw because we're not getting to the level we need to support 5%. Rather than giving up, they ought to be turning it around and looking at the Permanent Fund Corporation and saying, look, we need a healthier return, and we don't need you spending $1 billion a year. We need a healthier return out of the permanent fund. What would it take? What is it that we're not doing that we should be doing to achieve that healthier return, to achieve a return that looks like your passive investment benchmark or looks like the S&P? What do we need to be doing? And then focus on that. You don't want the legislature micromanaging the permanent fund. You want the experts over there, but we don't have experts over there. I love Ralph Samuels. Ralph Samuels is a great guy. Ralph Samuels would be a wonderful board member on ADA, on the board that's focused on investing in Alaska. Ralph Samuels is not an investment expert. Ralph Samuels, frankly, doesn't know a whole lot about investments, and having him on the permanent fund board is a wasted seat, a wasted voice, an empty chair with respect to guiding the permanent fund to achieving returns. So I think that's where the legislature ought to be focused instead of throwing in the towel and saying, what lower number do we need to get to so that the permanent fund looks good in terms of the returns that they're producing.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3. We are going to continue. We got one more dead ahead, number 3 of the weekly top 3. We'll return in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Back with more right after this.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, we are in the break right now. Donna Ardwin says, I talked about it in 2019. Legislative leadership, again, the permanent fund and the earnings. She said, I talked about it in 2019. Legislative leadership does not want a solution that would stop their agenda of getting rid of the PFD or raising oil taxes, or both. I mean, and really, I think that's part of it. Again, Brad, we've got a crew of folks in there who are the old guard, again, business as usual, and they see the PFD as a theft of their money and their ability to spend it. Right? I mean, they don't, that's what they see it as. They see it as their purview as the legislature. And it just infuriates them that it ends up going to Alaskans. They want to have control of that.
I've never heard of it as the theft of the legislature money, but yeah, they sort of treat it that way.
Right. I mean, I know that sounds funny, but that's kind of how what she's saying there plays right into that. That's exactly what they're saying. They're saying, I mean, this was Kathy Giesel at the Commonwealth North. That's $685 million. Look at all the things we could spend it on. It was Natasha. Look at the downtown and the housing and the homelessness and the mental health and the tourism. Look at what we could spend it on. That's what they look at it as. They look at it as a pot of money that they could have spent, and they're infuriated they have to give it to Alaskans.
Yeah, it's one more step than that. Look at all the money. Look at all the things we could spend it on that we, the top 20%, or in Natasha's case, the top 1%, that we wouldn't have to pay for, because we've taken the money out of middle and lower income Alaska, largely out of middle and lower income Alaska families, by paying for it through PFD cuts. So it's not just think of all that money that we could spend. It's all that money we could spend with our friends in the construction industry or with our friends in the government services industry. Think of all that money we could spend that we, Natasha, Kathy, Bert, others wouldn't have to pay for it. So it's a step. But Michael, I mean, I understand that, and I understand you want to focus on taking the PFD first, but this is money. I mean, this is just like the oil industry. When people say we ought to be looking at the oil industry for more money, we ought to be looking at the Permanent Fund Corporation for more money. Basically, what the legislature is doing is they're just taking whatever the Permanent Fund Corporation does and saying, well, you're not doing well enough for 5%. We'll just go down to 4.5%. They're just taking it, as opposed to being affirmative and saying, but look at the S&P or look at your own passive index. You could be doing better. Why aren't you doing better?
Right.
Those questions, I've not sensed those questions being asked, except in this sense. Mike Cronk and James Kaufman in Senate Finance did ask the Permanent Fund Corporation, Devin. They asked Devin, why aren't you using the S&P? But it was a setup question. I mean, it was a setup. Oh, some people talk about using the S&P. Why don't you don't do that? And then Devin went through this. We're not chasing headlines. We're chasing performance, and this whole performative art question and answer. They're not legitimately pursuing the issue of why the Permanent Fund Corporation isn't doing better.
Right. And Ben asks a question, which I think goes back to the whole onion aspect of this, is that there's many layers to it. He says, Brad's not wrong, but do we really want the PFC to earn more if it means government grows? And I mean, you're right. The government, we just talked about that. They'll spend every available dollar, which is why it's imperative that we get some kind of spending cap mechanism in there to slow it down, because then if we earn more money, we could put more money away to earn more money. I mean, he's not wrong about that they would just spend it. If we had been earning extra money through oil revenues or through a PFD or through the Permanent Fund Corporation, they would have just spent it. So again, it's a manifold problem. We have more layers to it.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to the New York Times article. We are a failed petrostate. If that's how we think about this issue, we are a failed petrostate. I mean,
well, but we have to think about this issue that way, right, Brad? Because again, you just saw $73 a barrel on a one-time windfall, right?
But Michael, here's what we're doing in that sense, in that case, and we're doing the same thing on the oil side. What we're doing is we're saying Alaska can't get its house in order, and so we're going to leave more money that's rightfully due Alaskans. We're going to leave more money for the billion-dollar advisors and the Wall Street the Wall Street community to get more of Alaska's money, because we can't handle it if we get more. So you just keep it over there. You just keep that money in your pocket as opposed to it coming to our pocket. Same thing on the oil side. We can't handle more money. We don't know how to. We can't be responsible adults. So you just keep the money.
Well, but I don't think it's mutually exclusive, Brad. I don't think it's one or the other. I think we're right in that the PFC has to earn more. I think Ben's also right in that they would spend it all. So we have to have a combination of, marketing it and tying it to an S&P 500 and having a spending mechanism, and it would solve both those problems. We're going to jump back into it. Here we go.
Broadcasting across the state from his own private studio with that killer 15-foot commute from the couch. The Michael Dukes Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
I mean, it is a pretty tough commute. I know some of you got, worse commutes, but have you seen all the dog toys on the floor? I could hurt myself on that commute between one side of the room and the other. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top three. We got one more. And, I hate to be that guy, but I've said it time and time again. I'm hopeful but not optimistic on AKLNG. And it looks like the AKLNG advocates have failed the assignment. Brad, what do you mean by that? So
we talked about AKLNG last week. We're probably going to talk about it in a number of more weeks as we go forward, as this issue continues to mature. And the comment last week, the comment I made last week, or the gist of the comment I made last week was, look, AKLNG is not coming forth with information that can satisfy the needs of the legislature and the analysts to understand exactly what AKLNG is doing and what the costs are and what the financial aspects are. They're not being forthcoming with respect to those numbers, so that legislators like Kathy Giessel are overreacting and saying we need to take control of this through a 15-page statute. We need to take control of this and force you to produce the additional information because we're just going to insert ourselves right in the middle of it so that the information has to flow through us. And we have this gap between the information the legislature legitimately needs to make some decisions and what the project is producing. This past week, they had a hearing. House Resources and then Senate Resources had hearings in which the Department of Revenue, as well as consultant Mark Begich, as well as Glenn Farn, were given the opportunity to come forward and explain the need for and the justification behind the administration's proposal to go from a fixed property tax rate based upon property value, and moving that to a volumetric rate depending upon the volume that's going through the line. The administration had the opportunity to come forward and explain that. And they had an extensive presentation. They had a huge number of numbers in there that were basically runs assuming different levels of investment cost in the project, and saying, if it costs $45 billion, this would be the economics, and this is what the state and the various localities, the various boroughs would get. If it's $50 billion, this is the economics at 55, right. and so on and so forth. Huge number of numbers, but it doesn't. Excuse me. Those numbers don't answer the fundamental question that I think the legislators have and I have, which is, how does this proposal to go from the fixed property tax rate that, by the way, has worked for TAPS since the early 1970s, how does going from this fixed property tax proposal over to the volumetric rate, how does that make the project more competitive? And is that the right number to make the project more competitive? Could we still have, if we reduce the fixed tax rate from 20 mils down to 10 mils, or if we front-ended it at 5 mils and then had a volumetric piece on the back end of that, would that work in a way that would still produce more revenue for the state? Is the state getting the maximum benefit out of the property tax? And none of the numbers, none of this broad array of numbers that Department of Revenue produced or Glenn Farn talked about, none of those numbers answered that question. There was no analysis of the competitive position of the pipeline relative to the markets that the pipeline's trying to serve. There was no analysis of of financing differentials. I mean, they just assumed a 10% pre-tax rate of return, overall rate of return. And there was no analysis of whether that's the right pre-tax overall rate of return, or whether there's going to be some additional financing mechanisms that will lower that cost of financing or maybe raise that cost of financing. None of that. It was just a bunch of assumptions put into a model that then could spit out what every taxing authority got out of the project at various investment rates. So after those presentations, I'm not any better off, and right. I doubt the legislature's any better off in understanding why the move to a 6% volumetric rate, why the abandonment of the fixed rate that works for TAPS, why the move to the 6 cent volumetric rate is necessary, why it can't be a different number. I mean, why it has to be 6 cents, why it has to be totally volumetric. None of the information that got provided answers that question. Here's I think the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is we're not having a give and take, an honest give and take maybe that needs to happen in a conference room. Maybe it needs to happen under some form of confidentiality, but we're not having that sort of give and take. We're having, Giesel firing off her legislation because she's not getting the information she thinks she needs, some of which she does need. Giesel firing off her legislation, them coming back and firing off, a 35-page slide deck that has a bunch of numbers, none of which answer the fundamental question. I mean, British Columbia got to their project by going in a conference room and working out a deal. Alaska had pretty close to, people talk about we're the closest we ever were. Actually, we were the closest we ever were back in the 2000s in the Murkowski negotiations with the companies. Those negotiations were in a conference room under confidentiality and produced a deal like the British Columbia deal, produced a deal that took into account a lot of factors because everybody was working off a common set of information, full information. We're not going to get there the way we're going. I mean, the only way we get there the way we're going is the legislature says, we don't care what the numbers are. We want this project so bad that we'll agree to anything. You just throw a number out there, we'll agree to it. I mean, that's what Glenn Farn and the administration is trying to push the legislature toward. Just agree, just give them a blank slate, whatever the hell they say, agree to it. We're not going to get to a deal though, a normal concept of a deal, the way we're going with Giesel throwing out a bunch of legislation that's going to have the state in the middle of a bunch of stuff that it really doesn't need to be in the middle of, if it had confidence that stuff was being handled correctly. And Glenn Farn and the state responding with just a bunch of information that really isn't useful toward getting to an ultimate solution.
All right, Brad, a minute left. What's the over and under on this whole thing with Glenn Farn, this gas line getting passed at this point, based on what you're seeing right now?
We're way on the under. I mean, we're way on the ain't going to get done, because we aren't going about we aren't going about setting the terms right, and not to mention the disarray that the international market's in right now.
Right.
But we're not coming to grips as a state with this project in the right way, in a way that gives everybody confidence to go forward in unison. That this is we've looked at it all, we understand, and this is the way we ought to go forward.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budget. That's the weekly top 3. Brad, thanks so much for coming on board, man. I gotta go.
Thanks for having me.
Start day drinking. That's what I got to do right now. We're going to continue in just a moment. We'll be back with more. Don't go anywhere. Hour 2 is dead ahead. The Michael Duke Show. Okay. Rob just said, we had some legislators and resources yesterday saying they don't want executive session or NDAs for the information they're asking for. Well, then you're not serious about it, right? I mean, Brad, at some point, you're just not serious about it. If you don't want an executive session or NDAs, then you're not serious about working with these folks, because I understand that there may need to be some confidential information if you're out there working on it. But if you just don't want it, then you're not serious about it.
Yeah, legislators are just scared of being second guessed, I suppose. They saw what happened to the Parnell, what's happening to the leftovers of the Parnell administration out of SB 21, and they don't want to be second guessed. So the way of not being second guessed is not having the information and being put in that box in the first place. There's also a problem that what if you did an NDA and a confidential and executive session, and Glenn Farn still doesn't give you the numbers? So now you've boxed yourself in by agreeing not to be open about the information that you're getting, but the information you're getting still doesn't solve your problem, still doesn't provide the solution. So it takes good faith on both parties' part.
Right.
I mean, it takes good faith on legislators' part to want to be part of that process, but also you have to have confidence that the result of that is going to be you're going to get the numbers you want.
I would think you'd still be able to articulate, even if you get an NDA or whatever, and you go in there and they don't give you the information, you could still say, we saw a lot of stuff, but none of it still answers the question. They're not giving us all the information. I mean, that doesn't violate an NDA. You didn't tell them what you saw. You just said they didn't give us what we need, and that's the problem. We need somebody with some chutzpah and some courage to go in there and do it. And that's just not working right now.
Yeah, it's not working. And legislators would also say, look, it ought to be the administration that's doing this, right? I mean, it was the administration during the Murkowski administration. It was the administration, Jim Clark and Murkowski himself, that negotiated with the producers on the deal. It was the British Columbia government, the prime minister and the premier and the various cabinet officials that negotiated those terms on the BC LNG project. It ought to be the administration that's doing this, and then bringing it to the legislature, and the legislature, getting the numbers to be comfortable enough to confirm. But here you've got the administration who just came out sort of out of the blue with a volumetric property tax, and you have no confidence in that number because they've not come with the numbers that help support why they picked that particular number from the dartboard. So it's a failure of trust all around the way, in the entire circle. And if we continue down this road where we have the failure of trust, I don't see the legislature approving anything. I see Glenfarne, sort of throwing in the towel because they really haven't put that much money into this. Glenfarne throwing in the towel and saying, "Well, we tried, but we couldn't deal with Alaska," and the whole thing sort of imploding.
Yeah, we get the $50 million guarantee, and we spent it all and kept our people employed for another year. We used the $50 million, and now we're going to walk away. That was always my fear. I talked about that at the very beginning. They were getting that $50 million guarantee, and they were going to spend another $50 million trying to get this pipeline in. And when it was all said and done, they'd wash their hands of it and walk away. Because it was just another jobs program for another consultancy or another group. As long as it was state money, they're okay. They weren't in it for their own money. So,
but to go back to Rob's point for a second, it shouldn't be the legislature that has to negotiate this. It should be the administration that negotiates it, and then is open. Maybe the conference room, the NDA needs to be with the administration on seeing the numbers the administration saw, but it shouldn't be legislators. I don't want. I love Rob, and I think Rob's, maybe one of the great senators we've had in Alaska, but I don't think he's up to negotiating these things with Glenfarne. I mean, it shouldn't be and I certainly don't want Giesel negotiating anything. So it shouldn't be the legislators that are negotiating. It should be the experts the administration has negotiating it, and with the legislature acting as a board of directors, looking over the information, ratifying it. That's what should be going on. And Dunleavy would likely say, well, that's what we did. That's how we got to the 6 cents. But Mike, I've been to a lot of board meetings, and I've never seen a board really react very well to the way in which you're presenting the 6 cents. So
right. Yeah.
It's just not working. The process isn't working.
Well, like I said, Brad, I'm coming to the conclusion that maybe the wheels have to come off the bus, and these people all have to be cleared out before we can get started. I just don't know. I don't know. Short version, says Rob, is that the legislature doesn't trust the administration. There's just no trust back and forth, and not that they should. The administration doesn't trust the legislature for the same reason. The whole thing is. Yeah. And I've not seen the
administration, frankly, earn the trust on this issue.
True.
6%. Yeah. Keep in mind, TAPS lives with the property tax that is on the books now. Yeah. And so TAPS lives with it, but all of a sudden the LNG project can't. Different economics, all right. Different economics. But where the hell does 6 cents volumetric
How do you back that out? Yeah, how do you back that out of the equation? How did you come to that number? If you can't answer that simple question, we got problems. I mean, I think that's it. All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thanks, Brad. You've given us a lot to think about today. Appreciate it. Now you can go on. Now that you've dropped your hand grenade of hatred, discontent, and confusion, we can scramble around and figure out where we're bleeding. Thank you so much, Brad. It's always
Michael,
good to talk.
Always thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks so much. All right, folks, we got to go. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Hour 2 is right now.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
Sounds just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the program, Hour 2 of the big radio broadcast, as we continue to pontificate on the failures of leadership that our government has continued to perpetrate on us. We just finished up with Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets and the weekly top 3. If you missed it, definitely a bit of a contentious discussion, especially in regards to the Permanent Fund Corporation and the gas line, et cetera, et cetera. And I have some thoughts that I would like to share with you on this, and to take a look at where we're going as a state. First and foremost, I think we should take a look at number 1 of the weekly top 3, where Brad essentially says that Senate Finance gets an F in financial literacy. Now, you'll recall, if you look back over just the last handful of weeks, you'll recall that you had luminaries, leaders in the Senate Finance Committee talking specifically about how, well, we shouldn't be using the cost of oil and projected cost of oil for our budgets because it's just too uncertain and not stable. The instability is causing all these problems, and we should, I mean, it was just a totally different crowd than what we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years from the legislature, because they never saw a revenue projection that they didn't love to either poo-poo when it was down or fawn over when it was up. And so here we have them talking just a couple weeks ago about how we needed to be very cautious, that the revenue forecast was there, but it was all insubstantial and it was amorphous and things could change at the drop of a hat and we just don't know. And then we get this letter from the Senate Finance Committee Chair, Lyman Hoffman, where he comes in and says, well, we know that this is tough, and we know that this could be bad. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to target, instead of the $68 a barrel, which is where they had initially said they were going to be targeting this stuff, they decided to instead, Lyman Hoffman decided to instead market at $73 a barrel. Like last session, to be fiscally responsible, we will use an oil price assumption $2 below the forecast when planning the upcoming operation and capital budgets, targeting $73 a barrel as a buffer for volatility and reserving at least $50 million as a placeholder for the 27 supplemental. Now, again, one of the same guys that was warning against using the new revenue, and by the way, they quote the revenue projection in this letter at the top of the letter. According to the Department of Revenue press release, quote, oil prices over the next year could be materially higher or, parentheses, materially lower than the official forecast. So they already acknowledge that things could swing wildly either way. We had already factored and already talked about from the fall forecast a $68 a barrel budget, which was tough, but we were close. We were right on the edge. We were on the verge. But instead of telling them, okay, we've got this projected windfall of $75 a barrel, maybe more, instead of saying, let's factor it at that 68, or, oh, you know what, I'll give them $1. Let's say they needed to factor it at 69, just because they were so close to break even and, still had a bit of a deficit or were right on the edge. Let's just factor it at 69, and we'll bank the extra $6 a barrel and put that away in the SBR, the CBR, some long-term stabilization fund. Again, these are exactly the same people who 2 or 3 weeks ago were saying, whoa, don't get ahead of yourselves. Don't plan on spending this money because, again, it's so unstable. Although we've been doing it this way for 70 years in this state, right? I mean, that's how we've been factoring the budget the whole time. Well, not the whole time because we weren't getting oil revenue until the early 70s. But, so for the last 50 years, I guess I should say, that's how we've been figuring it the whole time, not smoothing it, not basing it on a 5-year rolling average or a 10-year rolling average of the receipts or of the monies that we received over the years. No, we're going to take a guess. We're going to bet on the if come. We think it's going to be this. And of course, we've seen where that has led us. I mean, let me give you a little history lesson again, just in case you've forgotten. That back in the day, when Sean Parnell was governor, for the 2012, 2013, 2014, we were coming out of it. Oil was projected to hit $115 a barrel, man. High cotton season. That's what the projections were in the fall forecast. And then the governor started putting the budget. He put a budget together based on $115 a barrel oil. And then the bottom dropped out. And he's still pushing for this $115 a barrel budget. Unfortunately, the price of oil cratered and we were down into the mid to high 70s. I think 77, 78, somewhere in there. And all of a sudden, we had a multi-gazillion-dollar deficit. That's an official number, gazillion. It was a multi-billion-dollar deficit. And so what did we do? Well, that, my friends, was the beginning of the end, because that's when we started draining out the SBR, the statutory budget reserve. And then once that was tapped out and dry, we started drawing from the constitutional budget reserve, which I will remind you requires a 3/4 vote of the legislature. So this wasn't just a Parnell problem or a Democratic problem. It was a Republican problem. During the breaks in the last hour, we were having conversations, and I got a little argumentative with Brad on a couple things because Harold mentioned one of his favorite things to mention, which of course is the fact that we are not getting as much for our oil as we should be, which I agree. We're not getting as much for our oil as we should be. He said, let's talk spending and draining our SBR and CBR. Well, SB 21 drained the state over the last 12 years and continues to drain our oil at giveaway rates. I agree with that. I agree that we have some work to do there. But I would also point out, based on this single letter from Lyman Hoffman from last week, telling them and instructing them to target $73 a barrel for oil or for the budget, that even if we had gotten an additional 400, 500, $1 billion in oil revenue, this legislature would have spent every dollar of it, because there is no mechanism in place to restrain the legislature from spending every available dollar. This is Parkinson's principles for government. Right? Parkinson's principles is where work fills up to consume all available time. But Parkinson's principle for government is that government spending expands to consume every available dollar. Ben Carpenter went on to say, Brad's not wrong, but when he was talking about the permanent fund and the fact that it's not earning what it should be earning, because we have a bunch of non-professionals, people who don't understand it, at the helm. And we're spending $1 billion a year in management fees, and we're not even busting even at 5% all the time over the last 25 or 30 years. Over half the time, we're not even hitting that 4.5% to 5% mark. Ben Carpenter says, Brad's not wrong, but do we really want the PFC to earn more if it means government grows? And Brad treated that like it was us saying, well, we shouldn't do it then. And I don't think that's what Ben was saying. It's definitely not what I was thinking. Again, those two things, the permanent fund earning a good rate of return without the fees and everything else, and the growth of government from the permanent fund corporation and from being able to draw that POMV draw, are not mutually exclusive. They need to be able to work together, but it all points to one thing. We need a governor on state spending. We need a restrictor, a cap, something that is solid, something that is in the Constitution that they can't just blatantly ignore. That this is a problem that it is very complex, that it has, again, many unintended consequences. It has manifold connections to it, as I said earlier. If we fixed the earnings of the PFC, of the corporation, to where maybe we pegged it to the S&P 500 and we start to see some real returns, maybe 6 or 7% returns, to prevent the legislature from simply opening up the tap and just draining all that money out, we have to have some kind of constriction on the because again, this letter from this last week proves that they cannot be trusted. They cannot be trusted to do the right. Anybody who has a household budget, I mean, forget about business. How about just your household budget? You're living on the ragged edge. You're barely making your payments. You have some savings, but you dare not dip into it because it's not very much. And every month, every year, you're just on the raggedy edge of, do we have enough money? Do we not have enough money? And you get a windfall. You're part of a class action suit, or, your rich uncle dies or whatever, and you get a windfall, a material windfall that accounts for 15% of your annual income. You make $100,000, you're barely scraping by with your family and everything else, and you get a windfall of $15,000. I mean, let's be generous and say it's $20,000, 1/5 of your income. Do you then rewrite your household budget or expand your spending to consume that one time, potentially you don't know if it's going to come next year. You don't know if it's going to, but you've got that one. Or do you take and sock that away and try and live with it? Maybe ease your pain a little bit by using just a fraction of it, but put the rest away for that rainy day. So now you have more spending as you continue. By the way, you've never attempted to control your spending in your household. You're living on the raggedy edge because you're doing just what you can get away with, but you've never really had any discipline to do it. This is the problem. We keep sending people back who assure us and who are duplicitous. I mean, I'm sorry. When you said 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that we shouldn't be looking at this forecast and building a whole budget on it because it's so unstable and it's so unsuitable, and how could we do that? And then 2 weeks later, you issue a letter that says, we're going to use it all. That's duplicitousness. That's it, lying. You really didn't mean what you said, right? You really, not that that's unusual. Remember when we had the whole debate over the supplemental budget, and the legislators, the majority in the House was in there saying, "Oh, we need to get this done right away. We need to get it. We have to. There's a timing issue, and we must do it, and we've got it." And then 4 days later, it was a whole different story. Do you remember that? Let me remind you of that.
We're at the end of the process. This is our chance to meet the match. This is the chance to deliver for our students. This is our chance to deliver for industry and our business leaders. And we're saying, we like the bill, but we want to see what the revenues are later on. The reason I think we need to hold off on scheduling this bill for the floor is we need to go to finance and ask, what is missing from these pictures? What information do we not have? What are our expected expenditures from March 12th through the end of the year?
Important, need to be funded now, I would assert. I just think that given the volatility of the market, it is proper for us to take a step back and ask, just as the other body did this morning, whether these dollars are real.
So, I mean, again, they say one thing, and then 4 days later, 100%, 180-degree turn. Folks, this is it. This is the problem with government, and it's a left. It's not a left and right problem. It's not a Republican versus Democrat problem. It's a big government spend versus small government spend problem. It's a we know better than you how to spend your money problem. That's what it's about. And I fear that the only way we're ever going to get this solved is you got to basically toss them all out, especially the business as usual crowd, the ones that have been there for 30 and 40 years. All right, we got to go. Back with more of the Michael Dukes Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay. We're well, I don't know what to say. I'm just looking at this and I'm like, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? We just continue to blow up the spending in the state of Alaska. We just continue to go on in a bigger and bigger way. We know it's, I can't think that these politicians look at this and go, well, we know this is sustainable. I have a feeling more and more that they look at it and go, well, this is sustainable for my term. This is sustainable for as long as I'm here. And once I leave, well, then it doesn't matter. That's the feeling I get at this point, right? Rob says using oil as the basis for government spending creates a short-term mindset in your politicians and your public. And that's what I think is happening. They look at this and they realize in their heart of hearts that this is not sustainable long-term. You can't take a one-time windfall, apply it to your budget, and spend it all and think it's going to work out okay. But it'll work out okay till the next election. Right? And it'll work out to the next election. And then after I'm gone and I'm retired, then it's somebody else's problem. And at least I got reelected and did what I needed to do. Yeah. Frank asks, those with 25 years plus can be voted out. What do we do? I don't know, Frank. I don't have the answer for you. I mean, I pushed so hard over the last 5 or 6 years to change the players, and we changed a bunch of them. I mean, we got over 60% of the legislature changed. Unfortunately, the ones with the horsepower, the ones that are bringing home the bacon to their districts, the ones that are doing, the good old boys club, it's a harder, you just can't get them out. The Bert Stedmans and the Lyman Hoffmans, the Bryce Edgmans, the Louise Stutzes, the Gary Stevens of the world, those people that have been there for decades. And their people are just fat, dumb, and happy. I'm okay. Yeah, they're doing a good job for me. They're not really paying attention, but, they're good. And we did get some that are worse. I mean, I'm going to lump Rob Yunt into that category right now. I mean, I haven't done that before. I've been pretty polite, I thought. But man, I'm trying to get some answers on this SB 277, and I can't get the guy to answer his damn phone. Tell me to go to hell. Tell me he can't do it. Tell me to go talk to to schedule it with his staffer. I don't know. Just crickets, not a response. Not a single response. What are we going to do? I don't know. Maybe we just have to watch it burn, which is the most painful thing in the world when you know it can be stopped, when you know what the problem is, when you can see it coming, you can see the self-inflicted wound, and you know it can be reversed, it can be slowed down, and instead we're getting to the point where we're just like, nope, you got to run full tilt into that wood chipper. We know it's coming, but we just throw ourselves into the wood chipper and we'll pick up the pieces on the other side. That's where we're at. That we got to go through the financial wood chipper before we're going to, before we can do anything. Yeah, like Cassandra warning about the Trojan horse, said Rob. We know it's coming. We know. Okay. Well, let's get to it. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based. Free thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Let's do this thing. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were doing an Epstein thing there. Here's Michael Dukes.
Not really. No, I would never. All right. Welcome back to the program. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We were just talking during the break about the inevitability. As Rob Myers says, student of history here. He said, like Cassandra warning about the Trojan horse. We're here warning people about what is coming, but nobody's really listening. You know, the average person is just tootling along. You know, we were talking about the legislature being the problem, that there are legislators out there who have been, you know, part of this thing for decades. And we changed out a bunch of the legislature, not always with the best people, but we changed out a bunch of the legislature, which was the whole point of changing the players, right? When we said change the players, change the rules, change the location, change the funding, those were the charter of changes, right? We changed out a bunch of them, but the problem was we always had the same core in there. The same core of people that have been there for 20, 30, 40 years. And I'm rapidly coming to the conclusion that this is unsolvable in our current state. Not that we can't see a solution, not that we can't figure out what the mechanics are and what we can do to fix it. The problem is the lack of will to actually do it. And we become so short-sighted. Rob also said, using oil as the basis for government spending creates a short-term mindset in your politicians and in your public. He's 100% right. Because again, none of us, if we were being intellectually honest and doing an exercise, a thought exercise for our, for our household budgets, none of us would spend that windfall on day-to-day, would burn that whole windfall up on day-to-day expenses if we were already on the ragged edge. It wouldn't make any sense. We'd put a bunch of that money away into savings. But because many of these people in the legislature, I think they feel like, well, we can just push this on until, we can push it on for a couple more years until I retire. And then I go somewhere else, right? I mean, Lyman Hoffman's leaving. Gary Stevens is going to Hawaii. All these guys, we can push it off one more year until we're not here anymore. And then, and then it'll be somebody else's problem. It'll be somebody else's problem. And that kind of mindset is going to destroy us. And I've come to the conclusion that maybe we've got to watch the whole thing come off the rails and crash and burn before we get an electorate that is activated enough to actually think about it and make a difference, which is really discouraging because you can see it coming. It's like, oh my God, the wood chipper is approaching. We know it's, and should we just dive in head first and just get it over with? There's just no political will. These politicians, I've done my best over 25 years to be as polite as possible to many of these folks and give them the benefit of the doubt that in their heart of hearts, they truly believe that, some of the things that they talk about. But I'm rapidly coming to the conclusion that, they're all in it together and they're doing it on purpose. We just want to spend, again, this letter from Lyman Hoffman, who 2 weeks ago said we shouldn't count on this. And now he's like, oh no, this is fine. And of course, it's an election year. So you can trust almost nothing that anybody says because it's an election year. And the people in general, not you listeners who are super voters, engaged. I mean, you're an activated slice of the population. You're paying attention to what's going. But the average guy out there, Larry, who you work with, who doesn't really pay attention to any of this stuff, and it couldn't name 3 legislators if you asked him to. Could barely name the governor if you asked him. Those people, they're just not paying attention, and they're just fat, dumb, and happy. They just don't care. I did my duty. I voted the one day a year that I'm supposed to vote, or the one day every 3 or 4 or 5 years that I'm supposed to vote. And now I wash my hands of it. I'm not paying attention, which is what the politicians count on. And here we are. And the band played on, says Brian in the chat room. And the band played, for those of you who don't know what that is, that's the Titanic thing. The band played as the Titanic sunk. And that's where we're at. It's bread and circuses until these people have hit their retirement threshold and can move on and deal with it somewhere, or move to another state and not have to deal with it anymore. That's where we're at with this thing. It's sad. I mean, it is sad. We are $500 million over last year, haven't even added in the capital budget or the permanent fund or anything else. They have consumed every available dollar. Every available dollar. And they'll do the same thing next year and the year after. I mean, remember when Natasha said, we've got so much money, we just don't know what to... That was with the last windfall, right? That was post-COVID with the last windfall. The Alaska study industry would like to perform a study that asks the question, what is the limit of having your butt kissed by legislators? How many years is adequate? They love to talk and get fawned over by wealthy donors and infatuated constituents. The study industry would perform this at a discount for a few $1 million taken from the windfall. That's very generous of you, John. It's very generous. Maybe that's what we should do. We should just lean into it. Maybe I should just become a government shill and find a way to take part in all these government programs, and then I'll bank that money and put it away for that rainy day when the whole thing comes apart. Maybe that's what I need to do. Live off the system. Live off the enemy supply lines. That's what we'll do. Maybe that's what should happen. Because I'm telling you right now, folks, it's going to come unstuck. There's no way you can continue this and have everything just work out okay. Math doesn't work that way. Math doesn't care. You spend more than you take in, and you continue to do it, and it's going to lead to bad things. Like, again, some form of taxation where they take all that money and spend all that money too. Do you really think the legislature is going to want to put a restriction on themselves? Do you really think that the spending cap is going to be do you really think that that's possible without some kind of heretofore unknown thing causing people to be activated and motivated? No. Wow. You know what? I just depressed myself because we see the problem. We see the math seems to work out for California. Oh, Frank, give it another couple years. Give it I know it's a longer term solution. The math does not work out. And it's not just for California. It's for the United States. I know we don't normally get into national politics. But if you look at where we're at right now in the United States, the music is going to stop, folks. We're playing a very dangerous game of musical chairs. And when the music does stop, you better have a camp chair in your back pocket. Because things cannot continue the way that they are. It's just not going to happen. All right. Yeah, like looting the permanent fund. Oh, yeah. All right, we're going to be back with more. Chris Story is up next. Wow. I think we need him more than ever right now. He's the hero that we needed. Back with more of the Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes.
Allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Yeah, how's your pantry? Is your pantry full? Do you have some, are your gas, or your cars all pumped up full of gas? Do you have a bunch of heating oil? Did you get some extra propane? Put away some food? I mean, it's just called being prepared for a reason. Brian says they hear what they want to hear. When you say, if we don't get our fiscal house in order, we're going to have to institute taxes to pay the things that people want. What they hear is, we want to institute taxes. The intellectual dishonesty is astounding, he says. That's 100%. 100%. They can't stand the fact that citizens receive the dividend, because again, that's a $600 million plus pile of money that they just have we have so many things we could do with that. Kathy Giesel, oh man, we could be building these and bridging that Medicaid gap, and we could be, and Natasha von Imhoff, we could be building rehab facilities, we could be building tourism, cultural centers, and we could be spending all that money if we just didn't have to give it to the people, because we know better than you. Dodie says, you've been right on about the PFD for years, Michael, and you're still right. And yes, it is depressing. Because again, I just don't. People are only motivated usually by fear when something drastic happens. So like I said, I feel like nobody's really paying attention to state government that much. They couldn't name the members. They couldn't name the chairs of the committees, the one finance committee. They couldn't name a half a dozen legislators. Some of them probably couldn't even hardly name the governor. And it just doesn't matter to them, although it affects them more in their daily life than anything else that's going on at the federal level. They're just not paying attention. And the only way anything's ever going to change is there has to be something drastic. To put it in terms of, like, for example, like war or conflict, there has to be a Pearl Harbor. There has to be a 9/11. There has to be something that motivates the people and gathers them together and angers them or makes them fearful, that brings them together. And we're just not there in this state. We're just not paying attention. We just don't give a shit. We just don't care. Right? We have a cultural center. It's called Anchorage. It's an ongoing dumpster fire. Perfect metaphor for state government. I would not disagree with that right there, my friend. Would not disagree with that. Okay. Well, we obviously, I definitely need to, I picked the wrong day to stop sniffing glue, says Leslie Nielsen. Let's go over here to the phones. Chris Story is ready to go. Let's get him going on and see what he has to say. Good morning, Mr. Story. How are you, my friend?
Well, Michael, I hate to start off on a pedantic note, but it was Kirk Douglas who said that in the FA. He was in the tower. Leslie Nielsen was on the plane.
That's
Kirk
true.
Douglas's character.
Didn't everybody start repeating that throughout the movie, though? I mean, it wasn't just.
No, he kept coming back and saying, I picked the wrong week to quit sniffing glue. I picked the wrong week to quit methamphetamines. Kirk Douglas kept going deeper with that. It was great.
Yeah. So that was.
Let's just say you picked the wrong week to be Michael Dukes.
I picked the wrong. Yeah. All right. Well, Story, what save me from myself. What do we got this week?
I think this is going to be perfect. I think this is the absolute perfect topic for the state of depression I found you in this morning. It's called the motivational triad.
The motivational triad. Okay.
This is going to lift you up and solve everything. This is it.
This is it. This is the one. It's going to save my life. By the way,
Save
it wasn't
you from
Kirk
yourself.
Douglas, it was Lloyd Bridges. But I
mean, thank you.
Not to correct you. Not to correct
confused.
Everything with Lloyd Bridges. Yeah.
Did you look it up, or did
anyway,
some do-gooder in the chat?
I had to look it up because I'm like, that wasn't Kirk Douglas. I could see his face, but I couldn't remember his name. It was Lloyd Bridges, who's of course Jeff Bridges' dad and Bo Bridges' dad. Anyway,
also had a great role in Seinfeld.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, I remember he played the dad who could lift anything.
Dude, you act like I would remember that because I've never watched Seinfeld. But I mean, I've never seen. I mean, I've seen maybe one episode of Seinfeld in my life, maybe two. So yeah, it was just never my thing. Sitcoms are not my thing. So anyway, all right, we're 10 seconds out. The triad. We're going to talk about the triad. Okay, here we go. Thank you, Mr. Story, for coming on board. Folks, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do the YouTube-y stuff. Let's go.
On the Michael Duke Show, we talk about the serious Alaskan issues of the day in a not so serious way, because we just can't be bothered to take things seriously. That's how you lose some hair. The Michael Duke Show.
That is how you lose some hair. Ask me how I know. All right, Chris Story from ilovehomeralaska.com. That's his website where you'll find the links to everything, including his radio show, his podcast, his writings, his books, his pottery. You'll find everything there. ilovehomeralaska.com. Mr. Story comes on every week to pump you up, and to give us a little motivation and self-help. Today, his topic includes a triad of things. Mr. Story, what's happening, sir?
The motivational triad, and I this couldn't come a minute too soon for you. I feel like today I found you on the 11th story of a building, standing just outside the window, gripping tight to at once your vape gun, but also the edge of the windowsill, and you're about to jump. And I'm here to say, hold on, before you jump, let's talk about the motivational triad.
Okay, let's talk about. I mean, if I'm going to jump, I might as well vape on the way down. You know what I'm saying? It's just that you might as well do it on the way down.
Sure.
But yeah, tell me about the motivational triad.
And by the end of this, I may push you. I don't know. Let's see where it goes. But there's a great book just came out not long ago called Beyond Belief by Nir Eyal. Nir Eyal, spelled Nireyal. Nir Eyal. He's of Israeli birth, but he's an American. And he writes about the 3 B's of this motivational, he calls it a pyramid. To me, that sounds too much like a scheme. I wanted to bring to you a triad, which sounds a little bit more dangerous, but also a little edgier. And he talks about behavior, benefit, and belief. And so I'll just kind of put them in order, and then we'll figure out how this will save you from your own self here, this circular mental place you find yourself in after the last 25 years. So behavior is your actions. It's what you do on a regular basis. That's your behavior, obviously. Benefit, the second B of this triad, is your results. What do you want? What is it you're looking for? You might refer to Nietzsche and say this is your why. Like you can withstand any behavior actions if you have a strong enough why. The benefit in this triad is what's your why? What results are you seeking? And the foundation of it all, of this triad, is belief. This is your foundation. Like if you believe that your actions are going to lead to the benefit you want, the results you want, you are motivated. If at some point your belief is shaken and you believe that no matter what you do, you will not reach the results you want, then you stop taking those actions, or you begin to defeat your own self. You get in your own way and you do things that might be counter to what you say you want because you don't believe it's possible to get what you want. So when your belief flags, you're going to slow down on your actions, or they may stop altogether, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy to match your new belief, which is, it's not possible, at least not for me.
Okay. So I can see that. So you have your belief, you have your benefit. What was the third one?
The behavior, your action.
Behavior.
So, yeah,
Behavior is driven, and behavior is driven by the other two, right? So you get
that is
your
correct.
your belief is driven by your benefit, and your belief and benefit are driven by, or your behavior is driven by the belief and the benefit together. So you got to make them kind of all synchronous. You got to sync them all up to get it right. Is that kind of where we're
And
going
the
with it?
foundation, well, and everything is standing on the foundation of your belief. Let's just take America, for example. We're celebrating 250 years this year. If you have a belief in America, and like you truly love her, and you have deep affection for her, and you respect our country, you're going to behave in a way that is going to lead to results like, or benefits like, happiness, freedom, success, both familially and financially. But if you believe, change that one foundational point, change your belief that America is, say, racist, greedy, fault-ridden country built on stolen land. Well, you're going to behave in a way that supports that belief, and the results are going to belie that. There are going to be things like more anger, enraged, lack of happiness. You'll be less successful than your counterpart who loves the country. You're going to be lonelier, probably have poor health outcomes, or at least reduced health outcomes, probably from the stress of it all. So again, belief comes back to being the foundation. So you're going to behave according to your beliefs, and you're going to get the outcomes according to your behavior. And it's all flowing in a circle or a triangle, because there's only three.
I can see that. I can see that. So what was the name of the book again by Neil Isle?
Yeah, Beyond Belief. Beyond
Belief by Nir Isle, N-I-R. Okay. So break it down for me, Story. How do we get ourselves in this? I mean, because it's a triangle, or it's a triad. It's a triangular shaped circle going round and round, one reinforcing the other over and over and over again. So how do we get started on this track? How do we break it down for me, Barney style here? Talk to me like I'm 5, which you normally do anyway. But talk to me like I'm 5 and explain to me how to get started on this path.
You just relax with a pudding cup, and I'll explain it to you. Pudding. So if you think, so last week on my show, I talked about an experiment that actually comes from this book that he talks about. Dr. Richter back in the 1960s, which again, you could never get away with this experiment today. But he experimented with rats, and he had a cylindrical container filled with water not to the brim, but he had water in there enough to drown a rat, for example, and he would put these wild rats one at a time into the cylinder, and the rat would swim for 15 minutes, almost like clockwork. Each rat would give up at the 15-minute mark and then sink and drown, which sounds like an incredibly cruel experiment. Why wouldn't he rescue them? Well, he began to see that domesticated rats could swim for hours. So he thought, what's the difference? Same species, just one's domesticated, one is wild. He began to rescue the wild rats at about minute 14. And he would pull them out, dry them off, let them catch their breath, put them back in. He would do this repeatedly, and then he saw, okay, let's see what the new results are. The new results are, Michael, they didn't swim twice as long as you might expect. You might expect, well, they would go 30 minutes or maybe an hour. They went 60 hours, like exponentially longer, once hope or a new belief had been installed that maybe their actions could alter their outcome. The prior belief was, no matter what I do, I'm going to die, so I might as well just stop. Then they had a new belief installed just by being rescued a time or two, and suddenly they were able to push beyond limits that even humans could imagine possible. Like if 15 minutes is the best you could do, to suddenly then go with just one belief being installed in your brain, new actions and new outcomes such that you could do something exponentially greater or better or longer than you could currently do. That's like unfathomable for us. But the difference is, do you believe? So you could pick the outcome you want, then install the belief, which is maybe going to take some effort, but then you have to put in the work to achieve what you're looking for. Like if you're looking to run a marathon, you have to convince yourself you can do it. And then you'll train for it, and then you'll do it. If you cannot convince yourself that it's possible for you, then it becomes impossible. Go back to the example of America. If you think this is a horrible place, you're going to constantly find actions that will reinforce what you believe, that will get you the results you predicted, which are, yeah, I knew I couldn't get ahead. I knew this is a terrible place.
Yeah, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Right? I mean, that's the thing right there. And you're right. No kings, Mr. Story, no king. I mean, you meet somebody that believes it has completely opposing viewpoints to what you're saying. Like, just like you said, a belief in America. And you look at them and you go, and you talk to them for a little bit. And then you think to yourself, are we living in the same country? Because I don't see any of that. And it all has to do with those foundational beliefs, that base core belief that either people are generally good, or that, you know, the country is generally good, or something like that. But we've all met people who believe opposite to us, but it all starts at that foundational belief. If we're in the wrong mindset, we got 2 minutes here. How do we chip ourselves out of that mindset to get to the positive mindset that shows us not just the belief, but the benefit, and then affects our behavior?
You could begin with the end in mind, and just go to the end. What is the result you're looking for? What results do you want? Then match up with behaviors, sort of like choose your own adventure. What behavior would you have to have? What actions would you have to take to achieve the results you want? And then believe it. And you have to go find proof, find other people, read biographies, get real deep with yourself, pray about it, get certain that you can accomplish what it is you say you want. So be careful about what it is you say you want, because your subconscious is listening. Install that new belief, but then immediately take action, because it's not enough to just sit in the chair and believe something's possible. You have to go take action. And I think that's where some self-help or some pop psychology may miss the mark a little bit, is that you do have to do something. You have to go make it happen. If you believe it, you'll receive it.
Right. You can't just get into analysis paralysis where you just think about it. You actually have to take that first step. And I mean, I like that. All right, Chris. Well, I'm feeling a little better. Your mission has been accomplished. Thank you, my friend. As always, you're a light in the darkness. We appreciate you.
Thanks. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
You're a little light in your loafers. All right. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
Maybe I will push you. That's it.
That's it. Thank you, Chris Story. I appreciate you, my friend. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much. Folks, we're out of time. Tomorrow, Brad Anderson from the Homer Chamber of Commerce will join us, and more. The Michael Duke Show. I believe in you too, Brian. Brian says, I believe I can sit in this chair all day. Me too. I believe you can too. I believe I'll be stuck in this studio all day long. All right. Well, I didn't mean to depress all you guys, those of you who are still with me, but sometimes you got to just do what you got to do, right? We'll see you guys tomorrow. Be kind, love one another, live well. The Michael Duke Show.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.